Hello everyone, I'm Michaela Kathleen, and in this video I'm going to be recommending books based on aesthetics. I'm a little late to this trend. I feel like these aesthetics were really popular at the beginning of 2021. It's now 2022. I've had this video on my list for planned videos for about a year, but here we go. Reach back in your mind to the aesthetics that were popular last year. I feel like they're still fairly popular. I was very excited for this video. I was gonna make it like a whole series, stretch it out over months, and then I started trying to come up with books for each aesthetic, and it was really hard. So I'm just gonna do them all in one video. I've only got 3 books per aesthetic. So anyways, jumping right in, the first one is going to be, of course, I feel like the biggest, most popular one, cottagecore, which is the aesthetic of just really liking the outdoors, florals, picnics. Just imagine the Shire from The Lord of the Rings, and you will have the aesthetic of cottagecore in your mind. So the first book that I'm recommending for that aesthetic is Princess Academy by Shannon Hale. This book just has all of the spring vibes, I feel, even though a lot of it does take place in the winter. But it starts out in the spring in this mountain town. The main job in this town is the rock quarry. Our main character is just taking care of her goats. Our main character is named after a flower. It's just got all of the warm, sweet cottagecore vibes, I feel. I did definitely with cottagecore lean into the more kind of fairy tale side of cottagecore, I feel, with my selections. So yeah, this one just feels like a warm, cozy fairy tale. My next selection, leaning even more into those fairy vibes, is Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson. This is a Peter Pan retelling told from the perspective of Tiger Lily. This one almost has a bit of a dark cottagecore vibe to it, but it's definitely still got that love of nature, that very outdoorsy, in the warm weather kind of a vibe. It takes place on Neverland, of course. So if you're looking for cottagecore but with just a little bit of an edge, I would recommend Tiger Lily. And finally, I have another Peter Pan retelling of a sort, and that is Fairy Dust and the Quest for the Egg by Gail Carson Levine. And I felt like I had to pick this one for the artwork. All of the artwork in this book feels very fairy cottagecore to me. Even just these 4 images on the front cover. They are so gorgeous. But again, as always with Peter Pan stories, it's got just beautiful nature imagery. And yeah, if I could choose to have a picnic anywhere, I think it would be on Neverland with Mother Dove. So that was it for my cottagecore recommendations. And now moving on to a very different aesthetic, and that is dark academia, which with my selections, I definitely didn't lean very heavily on the academia part of dark academia. More so was looking at the dark part. But my first selection definitely has that in spades, and that is the 3 Dark Crowns series by Kendar Blake. This is just such a moody series. It also takes place on kind of a fantasy island, and so this is I would say Neverland's dark twin. But yeah, it's definitely just got those gothic vibes that I would associate with dark academia. There's lots of old castles in here, so even though they're not old universities, it's, I think, still got the vibes. And we are dealing with 3 girls who are vying to be queen, so I feel like it also has, in places, that kind of elitist, rich feeling that I would also associate with dark academia. So yes, if you are into the dark academia aesthetic, I would recommend 3 Dark Crowns. My next recommendation is another fantasy that takes place on an island, and that is The First Girl Child by Amy Harmon. This one does technically have kind of an academy situation going on. The girls who make up the main kind of cast of this book are in training to become priests, and so there is kind of schooling going on for this one. But again, it's just got kind of those gothic island vibes a little bit. Not as much as Three Dark Crowns, but yeah, it's definitely there. And my final recommendation is maybe the biggest stretch for dark academia, but again, as I said, I kind of ended up struggling with this more than I thought I would. But my third recommendation is Three Dark Crowns by Leigh Bardugo. I think this has just enough of the dark tone to work, right? Let me know if you disagree. The academia here, there's not a lot of it, although I would argue our characters are very witty. I'm partially just going on the cover, I will admit. But yeah, I feel like this is dark academia adjacent. So then you may expect the next category to be light academia, but alas, I could not come up with any books for light academia from my shelves, at least. The only one that I felt would kind of match that aesthetic would be Princess Academy, but of course I wanted to use this one for cottagecore. But yeah, definitely, since they're at an academy and it does have all of these light, summery vibes, this one would also work for light academia. But moving right along, since I couldn't come up with anything other than Princess Academy, skipping over poor light academia, we are next going to be recommending books for the steampunk aesthetic. And the first, most obvious one is, of course, Leviathan by Scott Westerfeld. I think this book was probably actually specifically inspired by the steampunk aesthetic. I mean, just look at the cover. There's no way that this was not intentional. So obviously this, I think, would be a great one if you like the steampunk aesthetic. I personally haven't actually read this one yet, but that is definitely the vibe I'm expecting from this book. Next, I have another one all about flying fictional warplanes, and that is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I am in the middle of reading this one, and Leviathan I'm planning to read next month, so lots of steampunk going on for me right now. But I am loving this one so far. It is so good. It is so fast-paced and exciting and adventurous, with the main character being a pilot. But I don't think this one was meant specifically to be steampunk in the way that Leviathan was, but definitely with the tech and the flying, it's got a little bit of those vibes. And finally, for this aesthetic, I am recommending Uglies. This one again has the tech, it's got a bit of the flying element with the hoverboards, it's got the same action and fast-paced adventure going on, and so I feel like it fits right in with the other two. My next aesthetic is the indie aesthetic, which I feel like is kind of just like not wanting to be in the mainstream, kind of having an appreciation for the past, especially like maybe like the 60s to the 80s-ish, maybe a little bit into the 90s. I feel like this isn't like a super flashy aesthetic, and I feel like it's an aesthetic that kind of appreciates pop culture just a little bit, especially music. So my first recommendation for the indie aesthetic is Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. This book takes place in the 80s, so it's got that appreciation of a historical setting there. As evidenced by the cover, our two main characters are very into music. They're also into comic books. They're kind of out of the mainstream. They're looked at as a little bit strange by their classmates because of their interests. This one is very much grounded in the real world and isn't like a super flashy, action-packed story. I feel like it's got the quiet, out of the mainstream indie vibes. My next recommendation is Kids of Appetite by David Arnold. This one does take place in the modern day, but I feel like all of our characters are pretty indie and pretty appreciative of kind of older pop culture. One of our main characters is a big fan of the book The Outsiders, which is a book from the 60s. Our main character is very into like art and classical music. Again, all of our characters are kind of outsiders. None of them really fit nicely into society. And so I feel like this one, even though it takes place in the present day, still has a lot of indie vibes. And then my final recommendation for the indie aesthetic is something I mentioned while I was talking about my last recommendation, and that is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This book was written in the 60s, and I feel like even though now it's considered a classic and all of that, super popular, it's kind of gone mainstream even though it has like the indie vibes. Like it unwillingly went mainstream almost. So yeah, that is my final recommendation for the indie aesthetic. And my final aesthetic is Arto, which is one that I found when kind of looking around for ideas for this video. But I kind of liked the idea of recommending some books that feel very like artsy. So the first one I'm recommending is The Fashion Committee by Susan Juby, which honestly is really just kind of a silly contemporary YA, but all of the characters in this book are very artistic and art is very important to them. Our two main characters, this is told in alternating chapters, are both trying to get into this prestigious art high school, and every year this school has like a competition to get in, and every year a different department hosts the competition, and in this year the fashion department is hosting the competition. So one of our main characters really wants to be a fashion designer and is very excited about that, and the other one just wants to get into the school and is like a sculptor, not a fashion person, but he submits to this competition anyways because he just wants to go to this art school so badly. So yeah, it's a book full of characters who are very passionate about art. My next recommendation is The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse, which is just an adorable, beautiful little book that is mostly illustrations. And they're just such pretty, simple illustrations that I feel like anyone who appreciates art would appreciate this book. And then my final recommendation is Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler, also known as Lemony Snicket. But this is another one that has a lot of artwork throughout, and it's just told in such an interesting way, and it's got a very unique tone, and I feel like is a very kind of off-the-wall creative book, and would be perfect for anyone who is like really into art. So yeah, that was it for my recommendations for books based on different aesthetics. Let me know down below if you have any recommendations based on any of the aesthetics that I picked or any other aesthetics. I hope you enjoyed watching. Remember, words matter.